Hi, I'm Sakshi, and a surprising fact about me is that I speak six languages, which are English, Hindi, Gujarati, Telugu, Kutchi, and French.
That is very impressive. First of all, this is Sakshi Gala, an alumni of New York University, Abu Dhabi, where she's a double major in history as well as film and new media with a minor in South Asian studies. Today, we'll be hearing more from her about the choices she's made, the lessons she's learned along the way, as well as her advice to young high school students as they prepare for this new, very exciting and upcoming phase of their life that we call university. Welcome to University Unraveled. This is a podcast that aims to engage in super authentic, insightful, and engaging discussions with students from prestigious universities across the globe. They will be sharing their experiences and their insights about university life, talking about everything from academics to friendships to adulting, finances, clubs, study abroad, networking, internships, and so much more. A sneak peek into the genuine university experience, the highs and lows, the surprises and confusions, triumphs and challenges, and everything in between. I'm your host, Arya Darod. I currently study at Minerva University, which is the most innovative university in the world. Welcome, Sakshi, and thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
I think the best place I'd love to begin this podcast with is it's been a few years since you've graduated NYU Abu Dhabi. So just share with listeners what you've been up to since you graduated till the present day.
Thank you, Arif. So I graduated in 2021, so the summer of 2021, and just before that, I had secured an opportunity with one of my professors at NYU, who I'd worked with for a couple of years at that point as a part-time researcher, and she needed a full-time researcher for an entire year because of a very big data project she was working on. And that allowed me the flexibility of graduating and switching to this job. But by Feb 2021, I'd also received my admission to Sciences Po in Paris. And so I ended up deferring that admission to the 2022 cycle and chose to do this research job for a year with my professor. I returned home to India because the job was remote. So I basically was working 9 to 5 on the research. And so that continued from May 2021 to August 22, which is when I left for Paris. And since then, I've been at grad school in Paris. It's a 4-semester program. So I'm going to be graduating this June from my master's. Yeah.
Let's rewind way back to the end of high school, which is way back for you, I'm sure. But you had three big decisions to make. So the first is which country you'd like to study in for university. The second is the major. And the third is the exact institution or the university you'd be going to. I'd love to walk listeners through the decision-making process regarding each of these in turn. So let's start with perhaps the most macro level decision. Despite the main campus of NYU being in New York City, what was the reason to choose the Abu Dhabi campus?
So the main reason I chose the Abu Dhabi campus is actually the scholarship. So it's one of the world's most generous campuses, specifically because their endowment is not tied to NYU's endowment. The endowment for NYU Abu Dhabi comes almost exclusively from the UAE government. And so most students who go there, I don't know if that's changed because it's been 3 years since I graduated, but most students who go there end up on some form of full or partial aid. And it's need blind. And so it's solely based on your application when you apply. And then there's a candidate weekend, which essentially happens around February. So they shortlist the applicants down to a certain list where they then invite you to Abu Dhabi for a weekend to explore the campus and for them to be able to talk to you, interview you, see if you're the kind of fit that they're looking for that campus. And so I applied, not thinking necessarily about the UAE. For me, it was more so that this was a relatively new campus at that point. But it was still, very exciting. The scholarship was actually very, very phenomenal. And it also didn't require SATs at that point. I had given the SAT, so when I was applying to other universities in the US, I was using my SAT scores, but my IB scores had always been better than my SAT scores. So I was very keen on this application going through. And so actually country didn't really play that big of a role in my decision, even at that point. I'd applied to a few places in the US, a couple of places in Canada, a couple of places in India as well. For me, it was definitely managing my budget and where, I could get both the best scholarship, but also like the best quality of education. So yeah.
That's interesting. And I'm in a very similar position. IB scores were a lot better than SAT scores. And so the SAT is a whole nightmare I do not want to relive. But just to ensure I heard you properly, you actually flew down to Abu Dhabi to have the physical interview at the campus. Oh, okay. I'd love to hear about, because that must have been your first time seeing the campus physically as well. Um, and I'm sure I've heard from friends who visited campuses that a lot of campuses have a very specific energy and vibe, and sometimes you just tune in very well, and sometimes you realize like this is not for me. But what were those few days like, and then did you feel that the vibe of the campus worked well?
The vibe was definitely amazing. So it's called Candidate Weekend, essentially. It basically happens, there's 4 rounds of it. So the early bird applicants, like I was, have the candidate weekend first, and then so on. Every application round has its own candidate weekend. They take care of all your expenses. So they fly you down to Abu Dhabi, your visa, your tickets, your accommodation, all of that is taken care of. NYU AD, unlike NYU New York, is a campus within a campus. So all our dorms are on campus, and so are all of our classes. The New York campus is not like that because it's all sporadic buildings scattered across the city. There's no one like enclosed campus. So essentially, the other example I can give you is Flame, for example, is a closed campus, and NYU Abu Dhabi was also a closed campus. So I basically spent all 2 days on campus. There were lots of different activities. There were lots of group activities, group sessions. We had a sample class as well, where like professors came in and gave us like a 2-hour demo of what a class, regular class, would look like at an undergraduate level. Um, it was we also had a couple of excursions into the city. So they took us on a desert trip. They took us on like a lunch trip to like a restaurant in the city, which was actually very nice. So it was a really good balance of being able to see exactly what student life looks like in a nutshell. Like it was a microcosm of that, because their aim was also to sell themselves to us, because we're also betting on a relatively unknown country for higher education. We're betting on a campus that's not the main campus. We're all staking our futures on this, and so it was a two-way street. We sell why we belong here, but they also sell why this could be a good place for you. So yeah, the experience was amazing. A lot of the people I met there ended up becoming my future classmates as well. So that was interesting. A lot of people changed that summer. So like when I met them in Feb, they were completely different from when I met them in August, which was also interesting. Because also during Candid Weekend, everyone's on their best behavior. Everyone wants to make a good impression. Everyone's very social, and everyone has all their high energy. But then once you come back home, you just crash. So I barely slept those 2 days, but then as soon as I was back home in India, I slept for 2 days. So yeah, it was a very exciting experience. It did definitely solidify my choice, in the sense if I got in, I would have gone, and we got our decisions 3 weeks after that.
That's a cool experience. I know it's a lot more impractical for my university, but it would have been so awesome to fly down to San Francisco, like physically meet classmates. We had a very similar thing online, which was still amazing in terms of meeting the people who will probably be your future classmates, meeting some professors, having that genuine chat. But I'm so glad you actually it's. I think it's very fortunate you actually got to go down to Abu Dhabi and have that experience. Um, I really am intrigued by the choice to do like a double major with history and the new media studies, plus the minor in South Asian studies, which you'll also have to break down for me a little bit. But I mean, walk us through how you decided that these were the fields which you were interested in pursuing and studying more of.
So my IB had history HL, which was always my best subject, even in school, even before I did DP, IB DP. And so I ended up choosing. So at NYU AD, like New York, your first freshman year grades don't count, first of all, towards your official transcript, but also you don't have to actually pick and choose and declare your major officially till your sophomore fall. So your first year is essentially for you to explore as much as you want. As more humanities, social sciences get people, we had a little more flexibility than the science and engineering students, because they have almost 5 to 6 more classes in terms of the total number of classes they need to take to fulfill their requirements versus us, which is why you're a lot less likely to see a bio major be a double major with something else than you're to see a history major be a double major with something else. I had more flexibility in that sense compared to some of my friends. So that's one reason I could do a double major. So I ended up taking a few history classes my freshman year, a couple of film and new media classes. My instinct was actually I wanted to do journalism, so I wanted to do a history and journalism double major, but NYU didn't offer that. And film and new media was the closest to that in the sense of storytelling, graphic, creativity. And I had spoken to a few professors at the time that, this is what I want to do. I'm very interested in writing, but I'm also very interested in history, the storytelling, narrative aspect of it. So they said, because this is still your undergrad degree, just do film and new media, because it's a very, it's an easily marketable degree. You gain a lot of skills, just like hard skills in terms of editing, etc. And the NYU film program, unlike Tisch, which is New York, the NYU AD film program is more of a jack of all trades kind of program. So you learn every little aspect of filmmaking, everything from script writing to editing to sound, etc. Tisch, on the other hand, in New York, you have to pick a specific avenue within filmmaking, and then you major in that. So you major in, like, specialize in cinematography, or you specialize in script writing. So it's those two different approaches. So that's why I ended up choosing history and film and new media. I had two other options that I was very seriously considering. The first was political science. And the second was social research and public policy, which is just it's a more complicated name for sociology. So those were my other two options. I didn't end up picking political science specifically because it was more theory than I was interested in. I didn't want to do so much theory. There was almost three and a half to four classes of just political economy, etc. So I didn't want to do that much theory. I was much more interested in history, also because the history program at NYU is very similar to IBDP history, which is it covers a lot of regions. It's very flexible, smaller program as well. So lots of personal attention from the professors, and I frankly enjoyed my cohort in history a lot more than I enjoyed my peers in political science. So that's the reason I eliminated that, and I eliminated sociology because I did realize that I didn't see any future in it after graduating. I felt like I could still, especially if I wanted to end up going to grad school. At that point, I was also considering law school, which is why history was a very, very attractive point, because a lot of people who end up in law school in the US have a history background. And so I also eliminated sociology because I felt like it was something I wouldn't be able to market at all after I graduated. So that's how I narrowed it down. South Asian studies, how it works is NYU AD doesn't grant that minor. It's not a minor that's available there. But because New York has that minor, and I spent a year in New York, you essentially need 4 classes from any subject. So political science, history, film, anything that deal with South Asia to fulfill that requirement. So by the time I reached junior fall, I realized I had 3 of the 4 classes down already. And so by the time I got my 4th class, I had to fill out a form, and I got the minor.
That's a I love the breakdown. Maybe I'm making this question like a little difficult for you, but I feel like I would love to hear the insight on this, because you also went to the NYU campus in New York City. But let's say someone has New York University as their dream school. What do you think would be good reasons for them, or good advantages for them to go to apart from the scholarships? Let's leave that to the side. That's a big factor. But apart from the scholarship, what would be a good reason for someone to go to the Abu Dhabi campus over the New York University campus?
There's a few factors. I think one is that it's a lot more diverse. I mean, not in pure numbers, of course, like New York, because it's like 40,000 people, it's more diverse in that sense. But I think Abu Dhabi it cultivates a very diverse community, because there's 1,200, 1,300 people in total on campus at any given point. It really is very, it can be very cocoonish, because, you're not necessarily, you're all living together, etc. But if you haven't had that sort of boarding school type experience where you feel like you're living with all your friends, you're essentially like a very romanticized version, but this really was like that, like midnight breakfasts, or like 2 a.m. hangouts, stuff like that. It's a lot less possible in New York, because everybody lives like 30 minutes away from each other. Somebody will be living in Soho, another person lives in Gramercy, somebody lives like down all the way in Queens. It's just not possible. So that community, that what your neighbor's pajamas look like because you've seen them walking down the hallway at 11. Or there's this one sophomore in your class that's really struggling, and you're a senior, and the two of you like decide to have like a study group session every week. So stuff like that, I think you wouldn't find in New York. You'd make your group of friends and you'd hang out with them for 4 years. That's essentially what the New York experience is like. But Abu Dhabi is not like that at all. The second is there's a lot more travel if you decide to go to Abu Dhabi, because regardless of your major, you're guaranteed terms and conditions applied. You need to like maintain a certain level of academics. There's other factors involved, but you will be traveling for at least one semester. You will be going abroad. There's J terms, which are essentially, so the J terms are January terms. You have to do 3 J terms. This is at least when I was there, so this could have changed again, terms and conditions applied. But there's 3 January terms you do, where every January you spend a month doing a special course. It's a 4-week course. You get graded at the end of it. It comes on your transcript. 1 January term you spend in Abu Dhabi. 1 January term you spend at any of the other 11 NYU sites abroad. And 1 January term you spend half in Abu Dhabi and half abroad to a non-NYU site. So for example, my friend had 1 J term where she spent half of it in Abu Dhabi and the other half in Uzbekistan because they were doing a class on Mongol history. Another friend of mine had a half J term in Abu Dhabi, and then they traveled to India because they were doing a class on dynasties. So stuff like that. So there's the travel involved in that sense. Abu Dhabi is also like a lot more, I would say, accessible in terms of exploring other parts of the world that you wouldn't necessarily, have been interested in, like Turkey, Georgia, Jordan, there's North Africa. There's so many new places to explore that you can get to from Abu Dhabi on your spring breaks or whatever. So I would say there's 3 very, very strong points in favor of the Abu Dhabi campus.
I think Abu Dhabi is in the process of trying to become an education hub. And so there's been a lot more like investment from the government side, trying to get a lot of foreign students in. And so maybe you were part of just the beginning of that. And it's ever since you were a freshman, I think it's been speeding up. So definitely not a bad place to like have in your mind. Maybe not something you think of as the number one, but something to keep in mind. Moving on a little further, I would love to walk through the key highlights of your university application to Abu Dhabi. This is always something I get asked as to why do you think you got into Minerva, which I genuinely cannot give a holistic answer to because I don't know. I was not the one who like evaluated my application and said accepted. But I think we definitely have an idea as to what were some of the strongest parts of our application. And as someone who did history and new media, I would love to hear what were some of the things you worked on in high school and you added to your application to ensure it was like as strong and as attractive as possible to NYU Abu Dhabi.
My memory is not the greatest for this either, just because again I can't remember specifically what the strongest points were. I do know what the highlights were. But like you said, we're not the ones evaluating the application. So sometimes we don't know why they end up choosing us. For me, candidate weekend was a factor, so I don't know what impressed them during that time. Even though like out of the 100% of people who are invited to candidate weekend, about 75 to 80 receive offers, is what I'll say. So, by then they have a pretty solid idea that they want you if they've invited you to candidate weekend. But I would say the highlights were definitely placing an emphasis on, some of my very strong extracurriculars, like MUNs were one of them because I'd chaired Akaman, and by that point, being house captain, stuff like that. Anything that shows leadership, that shows perseverance, that shows growth as well. You could, if you've started a sport 2 years ago, but you've been working towards it, that's a good thing to highlight. You don't have to be an expert at something for it to go on to your application. You just need to show why it's important, what it shows about you and your character. Strong academics, I would say 100% is a factor. Depends on where you're applying, that it ends up taking more of a space in the application evaluation, less of a space. But NYU's only gotten more competitive. It also doesn't need the SAT, so your academics are the place for you to show your strengths, especially if at any point in your personal statement you're mentioning a specific major. Say you're saying, I want to do engineering. Again, NYU doesn't require you to say that. They're very flexible. They're like, yeah, you could come here and do whatever you want if if you're interested in math, but here you come and realize you want to do philosophy, that's fine. You're not committing to anything. But if in your personal statement you mention I want to do engineering, your math scores better be good, because they're not going to be taking you seriously if your math is like at a 3 or a 4, if you're doing the IB. So again, that's the case. But again, if your math isn't great and you still want to do engineering, just don't mention it in your personal statement. So be smart and strategic about what you're mentioning and if that actually reflects your application. So that's the second factor. I would say strong academics and how they reflect on what you want to do. And interesting personal statement. I think that's very generic advice, but it is very important advice, especially for the US, because they do place a lot of emphasis on how good your personal statement is. These people do read your personal statement, is what I can tell you for sure. So make it interesting. Don't force the interesting part is my other advice. A lot of people in the attempt to be interesting end up becoming like, it's very pretentious, and that you don't want that either. Just write from your heart. You can tell when it's not sincere. So again, sincerity in the personal statement. It's okay to admit vulnerabilities as well. It's okay to admit that there's some things I haven't been great at, but I'm going to use my undergrad experience as a way to improve on that. So I would say those were my 3 highlights.
This was an awesome section on before university. I'd love to fast forward to hopefully something more recent and more vivid in your mind, which is the 4 years of New York University. I'd love to start with a slightly more macro question, which I'm super interested in because I'm just heading into second year at Minerva. But since you've done all 4, I would love to hear how the approach / like the mindset or the focus and priorities were different for you over the 4 years. So right from freshman year to second year to third year to the senior year, were there like significant differences in how you approached that entire year as a whole, like at NYU?
I would say there was some significant differences. I'll start with the commonalities where this was a priority. All 4 years were classes for me, and I was lucky enough that I never really struggled with them. To a great extent, there were definitely harder classes, tougher classes, more challenging classes, but I never really had like a lump in those 4 years. So academics were always a priority for me. That was common all 4 years. Another one was definitely friendships and, spending time cultivating those relationships. That was another priority. I'm someone who needs a 50-50 balance. Like I can spend days by myself and in solace and like alone, and I'm totally okay, but I also need community. And so those 2 things I think were definitely a common thread. The differences I'll start with. Freshman year for me was figuring out how to live independently. I was 18, I'd moved away from home for the first time. There were some things I really, really did struggle with, things basics that I really should have been taught earlier, but I wasn't. So, figuring out very, very simple things like your laundry, your eating habits, now that you're dependent on something in an entirely different ecosystem of food habits, health, stuff like that. The second priority was definitely what I wanted to major in, like paying attention to what my professors were saying about future prospects in these fields, what a lot of seniors and people who were graduating were saying, taking in that advice, making friends with people that had already done some of the things that I'd done as a freshman. And again, figuring out friend groups was definitely a priority in freshman year. I was lucky enough that some of the friends I made as a freshman, I am still friends with, and I think they'll be lifelong friends. So some of those bonds you create as a first year will never go away, specifically because you've been through all of those trials and tribulations together. You've been through figuring out laundry together. You've been through missing home together. So those I think were the 3 priorities as a freshman that I was grappling with. And I was focused on this. By sophomore year, some of that shifted. By then I'd lived by myself for a year. All of those worries and issues faded. For me, was definitely internship hunting and figuring out something long-term to work on besides classes. I didn't want to get too, caught up in classes. And sophomore year was also the year that I was trying to figure out how to juggle this double major, because I enjoyed my history classes a tiny bit more than my film classes, but my film classes ended up taking most of my time. So I was also juggling how to figure out these 2 majors. At one point, I was considering dropping one of them to a minor just so I could focus on the other. I didn't end up doing that because, I had a very nice chat with my mentor from my film classes who said that it's just a matter of figuring out your time. So that was sophomore year. Junior year was a lot of traveling for me. So not just junior year, it bled into. So I was in New York from my sophomore spring to my junior fall. So that is what I consider my year in New York. It was essentially um the yeah, it was yeah, so there was a lot of traveling involved for me during junior year. That took up a bunch of time and prioritizing. Study abroad again, figuring out New York, figuring out a new set of classes. NYU in New York has much larger classes. At one point I was in a class with like 100 other people that I'd never been in at NYU AD. At NYU AD I had classes with 3 people, so that there's that difference. Figuring out New York also, because it's a very different lifestyle from Abu Dhabi, because like I said, New York is a city campus. It's like Minerva, where you live somewhere else, your classes are somewhere else, your dining hall is somewhere else, your hangouts are somewhere else, stuff like that. And then by the time my junior year was finishing, COVID hit, so it was also figuring out what to do then. And I can speak more to that as my senior year. So COVID hit my junior fall, which was, yes, 2020. Yeah, 2020, the first, no, sorry, spring, junior spring. Never mind. I'm getting those mixed up. Anyway, COVID hit my junior spring. So at that point, we'd been given the option of being able to stay on campus. Classes would be moved online, but NYUAD had a relatively good health system where they offered us the option, because there were so many of us from so many different countries. They couldn't like just shut the campus down and send everyone home. A lot of the countries had already imposed restrictions on entry, so we could go home and finish the rest of the semester at home, or we could stay on campus. I chose to do the latter, which was stay on campus, specifically because I didn't want to put my grandparents at risk. This was a time when nobody knew, what COVID was, etc. Everybody was saying that, the elderly are going to be the most affected. So I chose to stay on campus. Most of my friends did as well. And that bled into the summer, which was, again, working on that project with my professor that I continued working on after I graduated as well, figuring out my future. So that summer is also when I did most of my grad school applications. Grad school was it was more of an impromptu decision. It was definitely a panicked decision at that point, because I didn't have anything lined up in terms of I want to do this job. Like this is a 9 to 5 I want to do. I was very confused. I had a chat with my professor, and she said it can be a good place to explore what you want to continue doing, because undergrad hasn't. I had very theoretical skills at that point, and one of the drawbacks of my film degree was essentially what I had considered earlier to be its positive point, which is I was jack of all trades, master of none. So even if I did end up going to like a film related job, I couldn't show them that I'm an expert cinematographer, because I'm not. I'm a regular cinematographer. I'm a good cinematographer, but I'm not an expert cinematographer. And why would you hire me if you can hire an expert cinematographer? So those disadvantages crept up as soon as that's summer between junior year and senior year hit. So that I focused on my grad school applications at the time. I only applied to 5, but they did take up a lot of time because they require writing samples. They require different bits and pieces of that application. And I also worked on my capstone. So capstone is essentially your senior thesis that you work on over the entire senior year. And I did mine. So I did 2 capstones. I did one in film, where I made a film with another classmate of mine, and the other was a 60-page history paper. So those were the 2 things I was doing that summer. And again, senior year, the priorities remained the same, which was focusing on the future. What do I want to do? Waiting for grad schools, waiting to hear back from grad schools, essentially. And capstone was the other big thing. Again, struggling with COVID, because classes continued to be online. A lot of people I knew left. They didn't end up coming back, so I didn't see them. So yeah, that's how I would describe my 4 years. I don't know if that's very clear, but yeah.
No, I love that. And I'm sure COVID was like this. I know how it was disruptive to us who were doing high school. So I was just at home, but I know for like friends in the US, I know a lot of them had initially planned to come home after like 4 months, and that became more like a year or more than a year for some people. So I know it was definitely like a shock. Um, but I'm glad you were safe on campus and that classes continued normally. Very briefly, I will probably chat more with you about this once the recording is done, but very briefly, just for listeners, what was the film Capstone about? Like, what was the topic of the film? And briefly, what was the 60-page history research Capstone about?
So my film Capstone, it was me and a very good friend of mine who was also a film major. We co-directed it. We had to work within a lot of restrictions because it was COVID. We couldn't film in big crews, etc. So it was partially shot on Zoom, partially shot in person. It was a story of two immigrants in Abu Dhabi, one of whom is a Turkish woman, upper class woman, and a um, labor labor working man from Abu Dhabi who works as a taxi driver, and how both of them meet at an English speaking class, and how they end up building a relationship without knowing a common language. So that was the capstone. And that was the capstone in film. And in history, my capstone was based on the origins of the RSS in India. And it was the political economy of the RSS, but from a historical perspective, and looking at tracing the roots of where the RSS political ideology comes from pre-independence to 2002, which is when Godra happened. So I was tracing that.
Have you seen English, the Hindi movie?
I have, yeah, it's kind of similar to that concept. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, immediately came in mind. What's the movie after?
Yeah.
You don't know what I'm talking about. But it's been more than 3 years, or about 3 years since you graduated. I would love to. I know for a lot of people, going to a good university, a big factor is also after the 4 years, I'm going to have a solid alumni network, people who I can build companies with and who can mentor me and who have connections in all these different countries and all these different fields. I'd love to hear from you practically, being someone who's graduated 3 years ago. Has the alumni network been in any way helpful? And if so, how?
100%. It's been very, very helpful. I would say because, again, if you're going to a place like NYU where there's so diverse people, you will end up not just friends, but you'll make so many senior friends. You'll get to know people. You'll add them on LinkedIn. It was very helpful, very tangibly in my Sciences Po application. For example, there were two Sciences Po. There were two people I knew who were already graduates at Sciences Po, that I didn't know them very well, but I knew they were going to Sciences Po. And that summer I messaged them. I was like, can you look at my application? I'd be really grateful. Any tips, any advice? And they really did. And I've been very fortunate that the help I was afforded at that point, I've been able to, help other people out the same way. So it's basically, it's a community that builds on each other. Whatever the favors you get from other people, you return as well. That it was very, very helpful in that way. It's been extremely helpful in job hunting. This is not my experience yet, but I know several friends who've gotten jobs, who've gotten internal referrals at the companies that they're now working at, that they got solely through the alumni network. Like, I'll give you an example. The biggest e-commerce company in the Middle East is Noon. Noon hired 3 people from the very first NYU AD class. They hired 3 software engineers when they were a very small company from NYU AD. This was in 2015, I think. Come 2024, over 70 people from NYU work at Noon now. It's now the biggest e-commerce company there. Just those 3 alumni working there and internally referring people from every upcoming batch, being able to vouch for them, being able to be like, yeah, these NYU grads are really, really good. Now it's resulted in this. So it helps even if you don't know the people, even if you reach out to them to be like, hi, I know you graduated like 4 years ago. I saw your profile on LinkedIn. I'm also a graduate of NYU AD. Can we chat? Always helpful. People are 99% of the time willing to chat with you. And again, because they've been through the same experience, they know the kind of education you've gotten, they will vouch for you, even if they don't know you personally. And that's a very, very valuable thing to have. And I think the last one, this is more practical, is it's always helpful to have an alumni network that's very diverse, because if you're moving somewhere, it's always helpful to have someone who knows the place. For example, I found my housing here specifically through someone I didn't know at all, but I knew I was Facebook friends with her, and I messaged her, how, can you help me with housing? And she gave me so many recommendations, and that's how I ended up finding my apartment here. So in very, very logistical, practical, realistic ways, also an alumni network can help. And it doesn't need to be an alumni network. Again, I can't reiterate this enough. You don't need to know the people personally. LinkedIn, Facebook, word of mouth, great things to always keep in mind. Go to LinkedIn and see, where are these people working? send them a DM. You just need one point of connection. That's one thing I will always reiterate with anybody, not just with an alum from your university. You need one point of connection. You can be like, hi, we went to the same university. That's fine. You can be like, hi, I saw we majored in the same thing. Or hi, like I saw you took a class with Mark Wisloki your senior year as well. It's as simple as that. You need one point of connection, and that's how it goes. For professors, also very straightforward. Building strong relationships is very important with professors. Again, there it's definitely a you put in effort and you get the equal amount back type of situation. You will need them for recommendation letters. I will say this point blank. If a professors, unlike your peers, are a lot more careful about who they're going to vouch for. If you haven't done well in their class, but you go up to them and ask for a recommendation letter, there's a chance they'll say no. Or if they don't know you at all, you haven't made the effort to interact with them all semester, and then suddenly you go up to them and ask for a recommendation letter, again, chances are they'll say no. But if you've taken the effort to build a relationship with them, going to office hours, or even, as simple as asking them questions, building those relationships really does help, because most applications for grad school, at least I can speak to, require 2 recommendation letters. Some require 3. So I would say at minimum, have 4 or 5 professors that you've gotten a good enough relationship with. It's also okay if they're, it's not just senior year. So if you had a great relationship with them as a sophomore, maybe check in on them once in your junior year, even though you don't have a single class with them. Send them an email being like, hi professor, can we catch up for coffee? It's really about maintaining those relationships, because they will come in handy. The most immediate they'll come in handy is if you want to end up in grad school, but they will also come in handy in the future. And like for me, for example, I was an RA for the professor I'm still working for when I was a sophomore. By the time senior year rolled around, she offered me a full-time job, and now I'm still working for her part-time, even though I'm now in grad school. And she's been writing a book the entire time I've known her. I've been in so many discussions with her about the book. I'm gaining so many skills from her. I'm earning enough to support myself here in Paris. I'm gaining a lot of research skills that I'm ultimately hoping will also help me with my PhD applications down the road, which I want to do maybe 5-6 years from now. I'm getting a paper out of it, so we're writing an academic paper that'll probably be published in one of the journals. So these relationships can be long lasting, but you have to put in the effort. They don't come served on a platter, essentially. So yeah.
And I mean, with profs, it starts out with them being, my experience just over a year, it starts out with them being a prof, and then sort of a teacher slash mentor, and then this takes a much longer time, but eventually it becomes like a friend who's much older than you, like a few generations older than you. And I remember you were mentioning how like that professor came to Hyderabad and you sort of showed her around the city and just took her everywhere, had coffee, had meals. So it becomes like that. So I think even more than anything, you're making friends for life. I think that's worth investing in. So wonderful.
No, just one last point I wanted to add. Sorry, I forgot to mention this. Alumni and professor networks can also be helpful because they know people. So you're confused, say you want to you want to work in X field, but you're not necessarily sure. They can put you in touch with people who work in X field and you can talk to them. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a direct connection in terms of, you talk to your alums or you talk to your professors. If your professor doesn't know, there's a very high chance they know someone who knows. So in that sense, also networks always help.
Love that small sort of off-road. Getting back, I would love to, since this is also something where I'm currently on freshman summer, on the summer after freshman year, still sort of figuring out how I'm spending the summer, working on a few side projects. It's very much winging it. And so summer after each year of university is longer than most of us are used to as compared to high school. Like I've got a 4-month summer. And so it's not just a time to sit around and watch Netflix. You will only get bored after a certain amount of time. And so I would love to hear from you both how you spent the 3 summers of your university, as well as for someone, and you can tackle this in 2 parts. I'm sorry, I'm asking them upfront. But the second is, if someone doesn't have an internship for the summer, part or full time, what are some other good ways to make a productive use of a summer?
So I can jump into this. So the first part, my freshman summer, I didn't have an internship as well. But what I did need a bit of a break, I think, freshman summer, because it had been 2 very long semesters. I was I wasn't burnt out specifically, but I needed time to regroup, if that makes sense. Like I didn't want to jump headfirst into something. I applied to 2 internships, got rejected because I had no experience. And it's one of those catch-22s where like they need experience, but then where am I supposed to get the experience from if if you don't give me the internship? So, that was definitely there. So I actually read a lot my freshman summer. I can't remember the exact number, but I think I read like 60 plus books that summer. I traveled a little bit with friends, and those were the 2 things I did primarily. And I did 4 online classes. I can't remember what those online courses were at this point. I know there were 2 data-related courses that ended up actually that ended up being very helpful for me by the time senior year rolled around. So I did online classes on Coursera, and this was at a point when I did need to be engaged, but I knew I needed to give my mind a break. And because IB had been so hectic and so intense for me, I've always been a very avid reader, you know this. But after ninth, not even IB, after ninth, I think I genuinely lost my passion for reading, because 10th, 11th, 12th were the 3 most intense years of my life in terms of studying. I just did not want to touch a book if it wasn't a textbook. And even the textbook I was forcing myself to, go through. And all of freshman year also, because life was hectic again. I was prioritizing other things. I wasn't reading very much either. So that freshman summer is when I really regained my love of reading after almost 4.5, 5 years. It was a very big thing. Even my family was shocked. They were like, we never thought you'd pick up like a thick novel again, but I did. So it's okay to spend your freshman summer that way as well sometimes. A lot of people don't admit that they do get burnt out after freshman year, because it's considered taboo to say you're burnt out after freshman year, because you're 19, how dare you say you're burnt out? But I think it's a very, very human thing to admit that freshman year is in some ways are not going to be the hardest year of university, even though coursework wise, classwork wise, it's one of the easier ones because you're still taking introductory classes. So at the end of the day, you're a human being. And if you choose to do an internship, that's also great. If you choose not to, that's also fine. So that was my freshman year. Sophomore year, that summer was part-time research. So I was doing part-time research with the professor that now I'm like bound to for life at this point. But yeah, so I did part-time research with her. And then the second half of my summer, not the second half, but the last 3.5, 4 weeks of summer, I went back to Abu Dhabi early to prepare for Marhaba. So Marhaba is essentially the 10 days of freshman orientation that is led by upperclassmen. So I was a Marhaba team leader, and I essentially led orientation. So we prepared for almost 3 weeks for these incoming freshmen. We prepare sessions, workshops, trips. We also have FYD sessions, which are essentially each of us. So as a team leader, I had 10 freshmen who were assigned to me the very first day of orientation, whom I would be with for the entirety of the orientation, and then for the entirety of the first year of their university, where we would meet every 2 weeks, and I would lead like these very intimate conversations, what's bothering you, what's not, because sometimes they're a lot more likely to open up to a peer like me, even though I'm older than them, I have more experience than them, than they may be to somebody at university at like for a counselor, etc. So I ended up working as that. So it was a job. So we got paid for it, but it was essentially a job at university. So that was my sophomore summer, and then my junior summer was full-time research, because this junior summer was also when COVID was in full flow. So it was full-time research. I was working in a team of 4. We were working on Zoom, and this was again like 9 to 5 research. And that is also what gave me an idea, a very, very strong idea of what my life would look like in the year after I graduated if I chose to do full-time research with my professor, because that's essentially what ended up happening in the summer after I graduated as well. So those were my 3 summers. And I think I kind of answered the second part of your question, which is like, if you don't have internship, what do you do? Hobbies, rediscovering your love for your hobbies is something that I very strongly believe in. I've seen it happen to other people, where high school is just such a struggle, and then freshman year is so intense that you lose some of these things that you used to be passionate about. Traveling, if it's within your means, if it's something you can do, is another great option. Online courses, I think, are a very, very solid option as well. Again, vet your online courses, so don't do anything for the sake of doing something, because a lot of them end up being scams, or they're just money hacks in that sense of they force you to pay for a pretty worthless course. So do your research. If there's a lot of these online courses that I think are very helpful to do are for skills that you might not necessarily get at university, or universities don't have the time to spend with you on them, like data work, for example. Very, very basic Stata R courses. Those are helpful to do online in your summers. Get those skills out of the way. If you're learning coding, spend your entire summer just coding. There's so many coding boot camps now that are free. Some of them, the internet is like a huge resource. I had friends who wanted to do CS but didn't have any experience in in computer science, who spent their freshman summer just learning how to code from scratch, and they ended up becoming CS majors. You can also take on a research project. I've known people who knew very, very clearly, senior year, this is what my capstone is going to look like. And they started their data collection for it freshman summer. Because in a lot of cases, you go back home, you're talking to people. If you want to do your research, your capstone on your hometown or your home country, you need to run surveys, etc. Always helpful to get a head start on that. Again, you might not be trained in research methodology at that point. It's very likely you won't be. You won't be taking your research methodology classes till you're like a sophomore or a junior, but always good to keep those future goals in mind and work towards them. So I would say skills, upgrading your skills, upgrading your hobbies, and upgrading, I guess, the time you're spending with your loved ones, because again, summer is the only time you get to do that in university. So I would say those are the three things that you can do as a freshman.
Yeah, absolutely. There are times where I feel like I'm wasting the summer away, but also I'm just very happy that I finally played on my drum kit after about a year. I finally like picked up a good self-help book, not an academic PDF, to be reading. Spending good time with family is. I didn't realize how much I miss them until I sort of came back home and realized that like this is the place where I grew up. So definitely can relate to a lot of this. Um, just a quick, I sort of got an answer, but I would love to like go a little deeper. You were doing history and new media, which in my opinion is decently disconnected from data science and like programming. But I'm curious why you chose to do the data science and a little bit of programming over the summer. Did you foresee that these would be very useful skills in sort of the future path you were looking at?
Yeah, so I'll answer that in two parts. So the coding I'm referring to is more social sciences coding. So it's like Stata, R, those coding languages, not programming languages in that sense. But the data skills I actually learned were just pure Excel. Because the Excel I was using in high school was just like it's a sheet, but Excel is one of the most important data skills you can have. If you know what Excel can do for you, it opens up a whole new world, not just for yourself, but also for the kind of jobs you're applying to. Any place you look at for an entry level job that you see data in, 99.9% they're working on Excel. So it's actually a very, very helpful thing to learn how to use. So that was one thing. I had been recommended that I do these things by one other senior who was also a history major, but was going to grad school for sociology. And she said that regardless of if you're going to do a history grad school or not, because at that point I had no idea what I wanted to do, she said, get these skills underway because they will help you as a humanities person sell yourself to a non-humanities background. To be like, yeah, I did history, but look at all these data skills I have. I can do data analysis. I can do R, I can code in Stata. And depending on what kind of jobs, etc., you're looking at, if you're looking at specific research programs, they might prioritize R over Stata. Those are very minor things, but it's always helpful, I think, if you're in X field, to learn some of the skills from a completely opposite type of skill set, just so you can add it to your uniqueness. Is the first part of my question, is the first part of my answer. The second is, I really wanted to do the coursework on Stata and R specifically because I anticipated that if I ended up doing my capstone in history, there were certain data sets that I would need to use, that I would have to, because I couldn't do any primary data collection. So for secondary data work, I would need data to draw up like maps and diagrams, etc. So yeah.
Awesome. And I know a lot of my very technical, very STEM friends are spending a decent amount of time this summer working on like just basic communication skills and media skills and like writing skills. So there you go, like selling yourself. For the tech people, like learn how to sell yourself to non-tech people. And for the non-tech people, learn how to sell yourself to like a some more technical person than yourself. So I'm sure a lot of my friends, they've just finished first year, but especially a lot of them in social sciences and arts and humanities are like at this point very clear about wanting to do a master's or even a PhD. And so I'm just wondering, I'm not sure at what point in your undergrad journey you realized you wanted to go and pursue the master's, but I'm just wondering for someone who knows even earlier on, what is a good way to optimize and make the most of these 4 years of undergrad to be like the best prepared for grad school, both in terms of like clarity as to what I want to study and where I want to study and which institution, plus like preparing to be sort of a good candidate and applicant for a grad school.
So yeah, again, depending on what kind of grad school you want to end up going to, things will differ. If you want to go directly to a PhD, that's also a path some undergrads take, but that requires like a whole different set of prep work. But if you're going to like a regular 2-year master's, I would say there's 4 things to keep in mind, 4 things to prioritize. Strong academics is important. Again, like you don't have to have the best grades, but you need to have, good grades. Because it's not like a job where they're only going to look at your skills. They are going to look at your transcript, especially in the subjects that you're going to end up in grad school for. So it doesn't matter if you've gotten like incredible marks in film, if you're going to grad school for history and your history marks are abysmal. So again, keep that in mind. Always good to have very strong grades in your foundational courses because it will help you waive them off at grad school level. I could waive off data analysis at grad school because I had that. I had one class and which I scored really well in my undergrad. So that's one thing to keep in mind. A research background, again, doesn't need to be formal research. I know a lot of people don't have access to that because professors tend not to hire in some places. But having a research background, starting off with a strong writing sample, you can always convert any of your academic essays into a writing sample. Getting those longer pieces of work out, very important as well. Being able to demonstrate that you know how to do primary research, you know how to do secondary research, you know your methodologies really well, you know your theory really well, all of those things are the second. The third is definitely, again, knowing how to sell yourself. I know this is a very abstract thing, but again, you could have the best grades, you could have the best research background, but if you don't know how to communicate that, not even just verbally, but even through your personal statement, it's going to be a struggle. So being able to condense what you're doing, what you know, what you're pursuing, etc., is very, very important. And I think the fourth, which I mentioned before also, a strong relationship with professors who can vouch for you. This is especially very important for grad school because some PhD folks I know literally got their PhDs because their professor at undergrad spoke to their professor at the PhD level, and that's how they got in. They had to submit a traditional application, but their professor basically called up his buddy at this is a friend who's now in Urbana Champaign, who basically said, yeah, like I have this one engineering undergrad who wants to do a PhD in mechanical. Do you have a spot in your PhD program for next year? He said yes. That's how he got the application. Sorry, that's how he got the spot. So strong relationship with the professors. This is where you make use of them. If you know you're going to grad school, chummy up to them. Take them out for coffee every semester if you have to. Talk to them about their research. Flatter them and say things like, "Oh yeah, your research is, Again, I'm not saying you have to be disingenuous about it, but you have to be smart about it. You can really enjoy your professors and you can have a good rapport with them, but you also need to be strategic about the fact that this is a professor whose recommendation letter will help me. Again, it's not going to be the most useful recommendation letter if your math professor is writing a recommendation for a poli-sci program. That's not strategy. That's not necessarily the most helpful. So be strategic about it, be sincere about it. So, the balance is a two-sided coin. But again, your professors are a resource for you, and use them. So yeah, I would say those are the 4 things.
Yeah, and with professors, it's honestly like the smallest things, like showing up to class on time and raising up your hands and sharing thoughts. Disagreeing with them is a good way to like sometimes get their attention. And like there are times where I like actively like oppose and I'm just in a very respectful way. I would just love to like get that discussion going. Um, and I mean, I totally agree with flattering the professors during coffee, but genuinely, you will enjoy that coffee. Like there are people who are decades older than you, who have lived a lot more of life, like professionally and personally than you. And so you will genuinely enjoy and learn from them. It's like opening up a good book, like open it up and read as many pages of the professor as you can. So, were you going to say
No,
something?
I completely, yeah, no, I was going to agree with you. I say I completely agree in that sense because, yeah, like I said, it's not insincere to buy them a coffee because, at the end of the day, you're building a relationship. I think the other thing sometimes you might struggle with if you've come from India, we tend to be raised with a lot of reverence towards our teachers, our professors, etc. But culturally it's a very different thing once you go abroad because some I've had professors who've asked me to call them by their first name even in IB, which was more informal than my Indian curriculum schooling. I still had to call them by like an honorific first. So getting that rapport can be challenging if you're used to sort of respecting authority in a way that you might not be once you move abroad. But again, like you said, you'll enjoy those conversations. You can shed some of your own inhibitions when you're interacting with them. Again, they have a lot of very useful non-academic advice to give you as well. They've been in your position. Maybe it was like 3 decades ago, but they have been in your position. They also interact with students on a daily basis. They may observe things about you as students that you can't see because you're still an early 20s or like late teens person. But take that advice in from them. They're probably the closest you can have to parents, not in terms of that familial relationship, but they interact with people your age every single day. They know your patterns, your insecurities, and so yeah, they're a really really good relationship to build. Don't shy away from them.
Yeah, totally agree. Coming from like our culture, I also did IB, but I still remember calling them sir and ma'am. And here I am speaking to professors who are like so full of accomplishments and they've done the PhD and they're way older than me. They're around my grandparents' age. And every time an Asian student calls them by like professor and then the name, and they will call them out and say it's just the first name, like it's just John or it's just Levy. And so it takes a while to get used to, but ultimately, I think it's really good for the classroom where even like they are learning a lot from you as much as you're learning from them. And so creating that kind of like learning environment where the classroom is not just like one way, but you also have something to teach them is like awesome in the long term as well. So I love this concept of like even at Minerva, I have seniors who say that at the end of it, they can count on like 5 fingers the number of profs who they don't call by first name at this point without any sort of like Mr. or Mrs. or prof. So that's lovely. Um, it's been a very wet conversation. I want to touch on one slightly more dry and maybe boring aspect of university life, which I think is nonetheless super important, which is just finances and making a budget and doing that accounting. Because I know it was the first time I actually opened up an Excel sheet and kept track of my expenses and realized that after about a month in, I guess I was spending way too much on things like meals and shopping, and I had to sort of cut that down because we're also in a foreign country with a currency that might be way stronger than our home currency. So it's very important to be mindful, especially if it's not our money. So I would love to just talk about how you manage finances and did budgeting and did accounting at NYU, what worked, what didn't.
Yeah, no, I also for the first time is same situation. Again, it was the first time in my life I had money in my hand that I didn't have to go to my parents for be like, I'm going out with my friends to like, I don't know. You guys are a different generation from me, but for us, the hangout was GVK. So like I'm going to GVK to hang out with my friends. Can I have some cash versus, being 18 and in the UAE with like dirhams in my hand and having to make a decision about how to spend them. So I totally get where you're coming from with that question, and I know it's always a struggle, especially because it's often an unspoken thing, but it is very valid that the amount of money you're going to be spending in India and what you're getting from it is very different from the same amount that you would be spending there. You know, it's why I get shocked sometimes at like cheap coffee here, where it's like it's still $400 in India, but it's €4 here, and that's like cheap for Paris. So keeping those things in mind, learning how to forget conversions in your head is important. I think in some cases, in others, it's more important, especially if you're looking at, things that, yeah, I can get them in India for cheaper. Maybe I should hold off on the summer till I go home to buy this. I know I do that for clothes sometimes, where like I genuinely feel like I get better quality clothes in India than I get in that I was getting in the UAE. So even if I did like an outfit, I would say no, I'm going to hold off till the summer. I'm going to go home and shop anyway. It's totally fine. I don't even need this outfit right now. I have enough clothes. Things like, knowing when to spend, when not to spend, especially when you're an international student who sometimes you get better services and goods at home than you would there. So I think that's one thing. I had a phone app. I'll try to remember the name of it. I don't remember it right now, but there's tons of these, so you can look them up on the internet. There's like a gazillion. Notion is another good one. It's not necessarily just an expense tracking one, but it's a really good spreadsheet type app, and it would basically classify my expenses into miscellaneous, food, beverage, shopping, travel, etc. So that's definitely something to keep track of. Having a nice schedule about spending also helps. Like our thing when we were undergrads, this is especially in New York, was always we would cook at home 5 days a week. We can do groceries and we keep our budget low that way. And then the weekend we would, go out for a couple of nice meals. That was our pattern as friends. We decided that as a friend group. I think that's my second advice, which is very early on, it's always healthy and very good to have good communication standards with your friends where you can discuss these things, because I think peer pressure is another thing people don't talk about enough in terms of spending. If your friend is going out to, say, a club or a restaurant, and it's out of your budget, that you're not comfortable with spending €70 for a single meal or $70 for a single meal, but you don't want to miss out on the experience. You have FOMO, everyone's going, oh, I'm not. Being able to push back on that and saying, I'm not comfortable with this. Is there a different place we could go to? Or even being like, okay to sit this one out. That's also fine. It might be time to find new friends if they're always doing things that are out of budget for you. That's another, sort of harsh reality sometimes you might have to make peace with, because if a friend came up to me and said, this is out of budget for me, can we do something else? I know I would say, yeah, we should definitely do something else, because I don't want to exclude them. So some of these things, I think getting out of the way early on is a good thing, because it can become that, you become so entrenched in a friendship that out of fear of not wanting to lose it, you end up spending more than you really, really should. And that becomes a struggle again. You struggle with guilt, you struggle with, this is not my money, I'm spending someone else's money. And if you don't have a, part-time gig at the same time, that is another struggle. Being mindful of also the fact that, you might even have people who don't have as much to spend as you. So I think healthy communication with the people you're spending that money with is very, very important. It's one thing I can't stress enough. It's one thing that I've been very fortunate to have always had friends who, have had very, very good communication strategies. Because these are uncomfortable topics. You don't want to admit to your friend that, you can't afford to spend those €70 at dinner. But you also don't want to, sound like a loser who can't spend a single night away from your friends while they are out doing something fun. So I think with financial management and budgeting, there's external factors that you should always keep in mind. As much as, you want to keep track of your finances, as much as you want to stop yourself from doing things, there will come a point where, it's not peer pressure is also not the right word, because nobody's pressuring you into doing anything. You're an adult with your own agency. You can exercise it, but it's hard. It's a very human thing to feel like, oh my God, my friends are going out and I'm not. So yeah, that would be my second advice.
I love it, and I love that we went beyond just the basic numbers and the notion to the very emotional and the very like human side of it with friendships. Something I've experienced a lot is being with friends for whom the conversion is just so crazy to the US dollar, like Nigerians, that a lot of things are very unaffordable. And I have to be very mindful about even suggesting someone to go out on a lunch to a specific place, because then it's very embarrassing for them to ask me for like what is the average bill going to be. So I have to do that fact checking myself and be slightly aware of who the person is, what kind of background they're coming from before I make an ask of them. And just another thing I'd love to add is, I mean, this is the first time for a lot of us in our lives that we sort of experience this financial independence. Like, so a lot of us are doing some sort of part-time gig or work study with university. And so it'll give you a lot of self-confidence to at least, even if you're borrowing money from parents, to have a very good track of where you're spending it, being able to stay within the budget. I think for me, there are months where my only expense is the work study money I'm getting from university. So I'm spending all my money on a daily basis. And those are like very satisfying and rewarding months just emotionally for me. So it feels very good to be able to like live off your own money as well, which is good to try out. I think we're students, and like when I travel with family, we travel luxuriously. But when I travel as a student, I definitely love to make it rugged and very, very affordable. So awesome. This has been a lovely conversation. I just love to end on a slightly more fast-paced and exciting note. So I've got a couple of just quick fast-fire questions for you. Feel free to answer in just one short phrase or one quick sentence. Let's start with three very unique or out-of-the-box electives you took at NYU Abu Dhabi, totally unrelated to your major.
The first one was called Forensic Science. It was a J-term class. It was one of those four-week classes where the entire class was about solving a crime from start to end, based on forensic science. So we literally, the professor was this incredible biophysicist who he basically set up a murder mystery for us from class 1 to the last class. And we learned like so many aspects of forensic science, everything from like DNA to gunpowder residue, all sorts of things. Very, very fun class. I enjoyed it a lot. The second was I took this one elective in New York by a professor of theology, which was basically like a literary analysis of the Ramayana and Mahabharata. And I was the only like Indian person in that class. Not even I wasn't even Hindu, so there's no Hindus in the class. It was a very, very fun, interesting class to take. And the last one was an art history class I took. This was also in New York, where every week we would go to a different museum and spend like one class in the museum itself. So this was also a very, very fun class. Got to explore the city a lot with it. The professor was very engaging. So those were the three unique out of the box electives I took.
Wonderful. Your favorite hangout spot on the NYU Abu Dhabi campus?
I have two. So pre-COVID, it was this one specific corner of the dining hall that was like the place where my friends and I used to eat all our meals. We would like literally, it was at that point, there was a point where it started to be known as our spot. Nobody else would sit there. And I think post-COVID, our living room. So I was living with 4 people. We had 4. So it was a 4-bedroom with like a really huge, nice living room. And all our other friends would, they would come and hang out with us because we really, as the 4 of us, really got into cooking during COVID. And so we were always making things in excess. So we had like brownies and sourdough, and we had like nacho nights and stuff like that. So my living room is my post-COVID answer.
Awesome. You're just as briefly as you can describe, I know this is probably a long story, but like your favorite memory of the entire 4 years, something very vivid.
Oh, that's the hard one. I don't know if okay, my favorite memory I think would be my birthday junior year, when my friends surprised me with like a treasure hunt all the way from like 10 p.m. to midnight, and I had to uncover clues all over campus. I was running around campus with like all these clues. They were filming me. It was wild. But I would say that was my favorite memory. It was I turned 21 that night, so it was very fun.
If you had another semester or year of study abroad, apart from the entire year you spent in New York, which of the other NYU campuses would you have gone to if it were totally up to you?
I might have gone to London or Buenos Aires. Buenos Aires because it would have been totally out of my comfort zone. And London because I enjoyed my art history classes in New York so much and London was the other spot that offered a lot of art history classes. So I would have just wanted to do like my eat, pray, love type European semester of going to art museums and drinking coffee. So yeah.
I'm probably, for me, Minerva, with our global rotation, probably Argentina is the one country I'm most excited for, just because I'm sure it'll be so different than what I'm used to. Lastly, if you had to leave with like one piece of advice or just something you'd love to share right now with a high schooler who's currently in the process of doing university applications. This can be a piece of advice about university or life at large if you would like to keep it that way, but just one sentence or one line.
My one piece of advice, and I think this will resonate with the kind of high schoolers I'm assuming are listening to this podcast, is that when you this is harsh, but it's, I think, very important. There's a very high chance as soon as you leave high school and you go to these universities that you will end up at, you're going to be dead average at lots of things. You've never been dead average at anything so far because you've always been high achievers. You've been the best at your classes. You've gotten great grades. You're the apple of your parents' eyes. And you are the center of the world as it is, but till you're at home. And I'm also assuming the same was for you with Indus, but all your friends are also doing really well. You're getting really good grades. There's a very, very high chance as soon as you enter university, you'll be faced with classes where you're dead average. There's going to be people scoring much higher than you, and there might be people scoring much lesser than you. Learning to make peace with that is very important. You don't always, because you can burn yourself out so fast wanting to be the best at something, even though there's no point in it. There's no need to get to the point where you're on the verge of collapsing because you want that 100% grade that you were getting in high school. Because what you have to remember is that high school, you were the top dog, or like you were the one the juniors came up to. In college, there's a lot more people. It's a lot more diverse. Some people are going to be better at other things. You're going to be better at other things. It's okay not to be, the one top dog.
Sounds good. Sounds good. And I mean, if I were to sum up year one of Minerva for me, it would in a sentence, it would be like a great humbling experience that was inspiring and much needed. So love, and that humbling experience is very important because university is still that transition to the real world. You're still in some sort of comfort zone and cocoon, but you're sort of still moving out of that and moving from being a teen to an adult. So love that. Love both the pieces of advice. Unfortunately, all great things and all great conversations must come to an end. I've enjoyed this a lot. If you don't mind sharing, if someone wants to connect after listening to this podcast or has follow-up questions, what's the best way to reach you?
I am available on LinkedIn, so you can look me up on LinkedIn. So it's the same, Sakshi Gala on LinkedIn. I have my email, sakshi.gala@gmail.com. I can also send it to Arya, so you can upload it wherever the podcast is going to go. And I'm also available on WhatsApp if someone wants to reach out there. I can leave my number with you. So yeah.
Sure. Sounds good. Thank you so much for the wise words on University Unraveled. And it was such a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
And yeah, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed having this conversation. It brought back a lot of memories that I had not thought about in a while. It's, again, some of these things I wanted to give a disclaimer that might seem outdated because it's been 7 years since I graduated from high school. But I think a lot of what I said might be universal, and whoever, even if it helps one person, I'm really glad to have done this.
All right, that was the episode. To all the young listeners out there, I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something new, and I hope you feel more energized, inspired, and curious for the exciting university journey that lies ahead. Stay tuned. Many more wonderful episodes to be released on Uni Unveiled across a diversity of majors, countries, institutions, and speaker profiles. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Uni Unveiled. This podcast is just a small part of a much larger initiative undertaken by my family called Serene Strokes to spread positive sparks of growth, transformation, and joy among all our audience. Check out our official website www.serenestrokes.com. In the description and comments, please feel free to share other topics and questions which you would love to hear about from our different speakers on this podcast. Until then, take care and remember that this big word, university, may not be as scary or as intimidating as you think it is. Thank you for listening to Uni Unveiled.